Ever notice how Gen 2 Pokemon Larvitar, Misdreavus, Houndour, and Murkrow weren't available in Johto? Did you cry in a corner the day you found out Mareep isn't even in Pokemon Crystal? Well, today we're going to fix these atrocities, and we're going to make changes to Gen 2 Wild Encounters as part of an ongoing series to make the perfect Crystal ROM hack. So before the first gym, we're going to see 4 new Pokemon added to the wild, and the opening route of 29 is not going to host any of them. The guiding philosophy with these changes is to try to stay in line with the vision of Crystal as much as possible. And in adding Pokemon to routes, we need to take a subtle approach. Adding Pokemon where the encounters feel repetitive or insignificant, but not adding so much that the player feels overwhelmed or making additions that just feel out of place. Route 29 does a great job of introducing the new Gen 2 pals like Sentret, Hoothoot, and Hoppip, but it also brings back the old Gen 1 friends, Pidgey and Rattata. It does a great job of setting the stage, telling the player this game is an amalgamation of Gen 1 and 2 Pokemon rather than its own isolated region. Above 29, Route 46 does a great job of this too, bringing back Jigglypuff, Sparrow, and Geodude while providing the player with a rare instance of the new Phanpy. And heading north of Cherry Grove, Route 30 contrasts Caterpie and Weedle with the new Bug, Spinarak, and Ladybug. It's only after this route that changes really need to be made, and I promise you, they will be. From here to the Elite Four routes, we are going to be making some beautiful fixes. We'll be placing all the Gen 2 Kanto locked Mons, Gold and Silver exclusives, and even the starters. This is a subscription checkpoint though, so you must hit the button or someday you'll die. And that would be very bad for your health, so don't tempt fate. Now, Route 31 is really the first instance of Gen 2's encounter problem. You again see Caterpie, Weedle, Pidgey, and Rattata, with the only new additions being Bellsprout and Ghastly, both of which are terrible for the first gym leader. Now, as mentioned in the gym leader video, Faulkner has had his Pidgeotto swapped to the bulky Noctowl, and I want to give the player more options to deal with flyers. This is where we save Crystal in a single change. We add Mareep. In Gold and Silver, Mareep originally spawned on the following Route 32, but I always felt it would make more sense to get the sheep before the flying gym leader. But along with Mareep, I'm also going to add a low 5% chance for Pichu. Now, on top of its electric affinity, Gen 2 makes a big deal of introducing baby Pokemon, but I always found it weird that the series mascot, new baby form, is so ignored. By adding Pichu into the early game, I think it adds some early unexplained intrigue to the babies, while also giving a bit of a spotlight to the game's mascot. Now, the Violet City entrance to Dark Cave is located on Route 31, and it's going to see the addition of Larvitar. I've always been a huge sucker for the idea of raising a Zero to Hero pseudo, and I think this is a sensible location which gives it the spotlight it deserves. Its previous endgame location just wasted one of the game's coolest Pokemon, and this early edition will allow it to shine for players that are willing to put the work in. And finally, the last edition before the first gym is going to see the Dark, previously Kanto exclusive Houndour. Route 36 already sees Growlithe, so it feels appropriate to add the seeming Dark equivalent for Night. Now, after Faulkner, Route 32 is going to see Mareep return, but outside of that, the originally existent Ekans, Quillfish, and Wooper feel like enough unique additions. It's Union Cave, however, that's in a weird spot. Onix, Geodude, Rattata, Wooper, and Zubat have already made appearances, and even though they feel necessary for the theme, it makes Union Cave pretty boring. So Union Cave is now going to see the addition of Cubone on the top floor and Marill on the lower. I also found Route 33 just after Union Cave extremely boring. Previously there were no new Pokemon here, but since the lone hiker Anthony has a Machop on his team, I thought it would be fitting to put in a 15% encounter rate. This would just allow players to get it slightly earlier without having to do the Goldenrod trade. Now, next up is Ilex Forest, which does a pretty good job by adding Oddish, Paris, Venonat, and Psyduck. Route 34, however, is going to see some additional Pokemon. While the appearances of Abra, Drowsy, Ditto, and Stubble is nice, since you can get Abra easier from the game quarter and these other Pokemon are relatively mid, this route always felt like like a non-interest. Now, Grimer is in need of a Johto placement, and directly below a city feels like a good spot to put it. I'm not certain of this change, as it could also fit somewhere around the potentially polluted Olivine Harbor, but the other addition we're gonna put here is Mankey. Originally, the only Pokemon you could get with fighting type stab moves before Whitney was the traded Machop, and that just felt very bland. So adding Mankey now gives the player a secondary option. As for the Goldenrod City Game Corner, we are going to see Abra remain as the 100 coin prize, but instead of Cubone, we've actually decided to add Porygon here for 800. I just feel like it's a neat Pokemon to use, and I wanted to allow players to use it in Johto. Now, the 1500 coin prize in Crystal was Wobbuffet, and I always felt like this was a huge downgrade from Silver and Gold's top prize of Dratini. I've decided to move Wobbuffet to the Celadon Game Corner and put Dratini back in Goldenrod. Now, for the National Park, I've added Scyther to the normal encounter. The reason for this is that anyone playing on an emulator will always simply change the date on their computer to move it to the bug catching contest if they're looking for it. This breaks immersion, so I just decided to make it a little more accessible. The other big change we're making to National Park is that Murkrow will be a night edition. Now, next to coincide with Growlithe and Houndour on Route 36, I'm going to add Vulpix to Route 37, just as it was in Pokemon Silver. And upon entering Ecruteak City, Burn Tower is going to open a few more options for the player. Now, since it's Burns after all, this felt like an appropriate spot to put Slugma, who was previously trapped in Kanto. Now, Magmar was actually removed here during the jump from Gold and Silver to Crystal, so it's going to return with a 5% spawn rate in the lower level. And the last Pokemon that was in dire need of a placement here is Misdreavus. Since Morty now has one on his team, and the tower is obviously quite abandoned, this just felt like the perfect spot to put the ghost that previously had got no love from Game Freak. It's actually at this point already, by Gym 4, that all the big Gen 2 but stuck in Kanto offenses have been rectified. Now, heading west towards Olivine, I've decided to add Doduo to Route 38. There's a bird keeper here with this Pokemon, and it just feels like the place that Doduo would be. And the following Route 39 is going to see the addition of Ponyta. Seeing as this is a farm area that features Miltank and Tauros, I felt like it wouldn't be a huge stretch to also add a horse to it. One huge issue with the original Gen 2 was that before getting 8 badges, your only fire options were Cyndaquil, Growlithe, and Magmar. And I feel like we've done a good job of expanding the options for fire types outside of the starter. Now, heading to the ocean routes, Shelter is now going to appear on the coastal route 40, while we've added Horsey to 41, which is the more pure ocean route that surrounds the World Islands. It's also probably at this point I should note that wild Pokemon are going to be seeing level buffs through this whole game, and while there will be slight changes to the whole game, it's at this point that you're going to start seeing Pokemon 5 to 10 levels higher than originally. Moving east of Ecruteak is going to have Mount Mortar, which will now give Rhyhorn, and it's also sometime around this point where the player can head to the Union Cave lower levels to get Lapras. And I thought to make that quest a little more interesting, we would add a 5% spawn rate for Kangaskhan. Now, Route 42 has seen the addition of Remoraid swimming in the water, along with a 20% chance for Gligar in the grass. And Route 43 below Lake of Rage will see a 5% chance for Skarmory, 10% chance of Fluffy, and the legendary return of Girafarig. Now, from here, no more routes open up until after the radio tower, but there is a small patch of grass on this Route 44 right before Ice Cave. I always found this a neat sort of island, and I wanted to do something cool with it, so currently we have Electabuzz, Magmar, and Poliwhirl on it, and while this might be a little too bold, I'm open to hear your thoughts. Now, Ice Cave is going to see the likes of Swinub, Jinx, and Sneasel, but the level curve has really been bumped here with these Pokemon in the 30s rather than low 20s. And finally, Route 45 below Blackthorn is going to see some just generally solid powerhouse mountain type Pokemon, including Donphan, Graveler, Gligar, Ursaring, and Skarmory. But that's not it, however, as there are 2 technically Kanto roads that take the player to Victory Road. I should mention here that I want to give the player access to all 251 Pokemon in this ROM hack. Now, you'll have to subscribe and follow along for the coming decisions on legendaries and fossils, but one group of Pokemon that have been coming up a lot are the starters. While I understand some people will have issues with this, I think given our scenario, the most fitting place for these guys are Route 27. This is the route just east of New Barktown, and I like this decision because it makes sense that they would be close to where Professor Elm lives to have caught them. Chikorita will have a 5% spawn rate in the morning, Cyndaquil will have a 5% in the day, and Totodile at night. We're leaving them at level 5 so as not to encourage players to run all 3 for the Elite Four, but also just for story consistency. consistency. Now, Victory Road is going to see pretty much the expected Golem, Rhydon, Donphan, Golbat, Sandslash, but the big and final addition we're going to look at today is Route 26. The answer of where to put the Kanto starters has eluded me for quite some time. In Gen 1, the Kanto starters are not available in the Kanto wild, so it felt weird to put them there now. Route 26 is interesting, however, as it kind of acts as an alternative route to the Elite Four that wasn't accessible in Gen 1. It's a place that the player Red never went, but given that it's in Kanto, I think it makes for a really good placement of our Gen 1 starters. And so for Pokédex purposes, Route 26 is going to have a 1% encounter rate of Bulbasaur in the morning, Charmander in the day, and Squirtle at night, all spawning at level 5. And while we're not quite done with encounters, since we still need to fix Kanto, I think these changes will make team diversity and the player experience significantly better. Subscribe and follow along, and we'll see you in the next one.